People talk about God-given rights or human rights, but I recently heard you discussing this, and you said that it's not that simple. You commented that the innate rights that we should have as humans comes with responsibility.
Yeah, universal duties without which the universal rights can't be distributed over the populace under any socio-political economic configuration is what I meant. Without duties to tell people how to use their rights will be misused, and that will lead to social collapse and chaos. As we all know, the rights of infants and imbeciles are attenuated because they can't make proper use of the rights they would otherwise enjoy. A child does not have the right to drink, it doesn't have the right to drive a car, doesn't have the right of free expression, it can't sit there and swear a blue streak at its parents, etc., etc. I mean, there are all kinds of rights that a child does not enjoy because it's not mature enough to understand the duties and responsibilities that go along with those rights.
Right, that's a good example. The implication was that if we fail to hold up our end of the bargain by fulfilling our responsibilities, we lose the moral standing to claim such rights.
That's right. Rights must be properly applied, which requires training, discipline, and understanding. Children acquire rights only as they mature enough to use them wisely. Rights and duties relate, as do potentialization and actualization in the CTMU. Together, they define the evolutionary grammar of the metaformal system, the conspansive teleprecursive grammar of the metaformal system. Therefore, the coupling of rights and duties is fundamental, because this is an ultimate theory of reality.
Do you feel that your view bolsters or contradicts the basic concept of natural law?
Well, the CTMU is the only framework in which the concept of natural law can be fully expressed and justified. There is no other way to do it. You know, a natural law is, for people that don't understand what it is the idea that morality comes from nature, which endows everything with a teleological purpose or function. The realization of this purpose or function is good and moral, right? By definition. In other words, they just kind of define natural law into existence and attach good to it because they want to do so. Thus, any law that is good is moral, and any moral law is good. Legality and morality are biconditional and linked by teleology. Otherwise, law would have no solid justification or stable foundation, and it would be pretty much worthless. We'd be stuck with a kind of legal relativism, which arguably we're stuck with today because people have very little understanding of natural law. We realize natural law by doing that for which nature has suited us, and by maximizing our stratified individual and collective identities, which of course requires an understanding of reality and human nature, and each of us as an individual. In other words, we must individually couple our own natures with nature in general, and thereby configure our respective destinies. Human beings have intrinsic values governing rational thought and behavior. We all sense that we have these intrinsic values, of course, but we don't know quite where they come from. That we need theoretical grounding for. Knowledge of right and wrong are inherent in human beings rather than determinations of society or court judges. The theory of natural law is juxtaposed to another theory called legal positivism, which is a legal philosophy that says that law is conventional or socially constructed and synonymous with positive norms that are chosen by legislators and determined by common law or case law and judges in a court of law. Natural law, or teleology, or the will of God, can be known by unaided human reason, and this has nothing to do with convention or anything else. It has to be tautological. You've got to be able to reason to it from first principles. Now, natural law is a rejection of ethical subjectivism or moral relativism, and it affirms the absolute morality or absolute scales of morality that are appealed to by religion and other ideologies that are not necessarily civil or conventional in nature. Immoral acts, of course, are just those which violate natural law, and only immoral acts should ever be illegal. But not all immoral acts, of course, especially where their victimness need be illegal. In other words, if you do something illegal like jaywalk, that doesn't mean you need to be thrown in the slammer for it. especially since there are no victims for the so-called crime. You see what I mean? You violated a natural law because you may have endangered yourself, but because there was actually, no victim, and maybe there were no cars coming for miles and you could clearly see that, then an exception must be made. You can't just make everything that violates absolutes, moral absolutes, or conceivably or potentially violates such absolutes. You can't make everything like that illegal, otherwise society would be a straitjacket. And none of us want that. And just as morality and goodness are defined by natural law, so are justice and fairness. Of course, these are all related concepts. They're all determined by teleology. Now, as I mentioned in the CTMU, that means determined by the telic principle, which describes reality's self-fulfillment of the requirements of optimal self-identification, self-realization, or self-actualization in the CTMU ontology. Okay, do you understand what natural law is and how it's distinguished from legal positivism? Moral absolutism, or natural law, basically says that we all have kind of a categorical imperative, or a set of instincts that tell us what's right and wrong. And that's basically what we're dealing with natural law. It's juxtaposed to legal positivism, because legal positivism says no, it's Congress people or legislators and or judges and or mere social convention that determine what laws are. And the reason we have to follow those laws is because otherwise society will collapse, right? Yeah. But of course, that's an insufficient governing criterion, because it doesn't tell you what a society should be. Obviously, if you have a bad society, then it should collapse, right? It's not making any distinction between a good society and a bad one.
Right.
Whereas natural law actually makes that distinction. It takes everything back to moral absolutes, so that then you can decide whether your society itself might need reformation. Okay? In other words, as you know, our society right now is governed by these stinking critarchs, these judges who more or less appoint themselves, each one is a president or kind of a little dictator, that when the president says something, one of these critarchs, who is usually a progressivist, breaks in and says, no, I've decided that that's not going to happen. You realize every time Trump says something, you've got one of these clowns breaking in and saying, no, that's not the way it's going to be.
Right.
And of course, one is forced to wonder who these people are, because they're unelected. The three branches of government are the legislative, executive, and judicial branch, and the judicial branch is completely unelected. These people come from nowhere. They're appointees, all right? And yet here they are interfering in decisions that are made on behalf of everybody. Well, I don't want them making decisions for me because I didn't elect them. I don't care what law school they went to and so on and so forth. But the idea that a critarch, that a judge can break in and apply his own opinion as law, that's moral relativism, right? Whereas in the case of natural law, we can actually take it back to moral absolutes. For example, a Christian would take it back to the prime moral absolute of Christianity, which is the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and do not do unto others that which you would have them refrain from doing to you.